Well, hey everyone, welcome to the Ridge Community Church Online. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Tyler and I'm our online campus pastor, and you picked a great week to be here with us, so thank you for joining us wherever you are and whoever you are watching with. Today we are actually kicking off a brand new series called Eye of the Storms. And wow, 2020, it sure has been a year of storms. In fact, we just think about the health storm with the COVID-19 pandemic, the financial storms as a result of that, there's social storms, political storms, so much going on. In fact, I was reading this article from Forbes magazine the other day, and they were talking about some of the issues that are happening with us mentally as a result of all of these storms. And I wanted to share some of these stats here with you. They said that nearly 1 in 5 Americans reported feeling anxious or nervous most or all of the time during just this previous week. And so that's 20%. We read that, in fact, 1 in 5 Americans have said that they've had a physical reaction when thinking about this year. And my bet is it hasn't been a good reaction. And then more than 1/3 of Americans have displayed clinical signs of depression, anxiety, or both during this year. Wow, those are pretty significant stats, which my bet is if this season has not impacted you, it's definitely impacted someone that you love. And we may even wonder, well, hey, with all that's going on, where's God in the midst of all of this? Like, what is God going to do? And that's what our lead pastor, Mark, is going to address as we kick off part 1 of Eye of the Storms. And so here's what I want you to do. Since you or someone you know is probably impacted by all of this, I want you to invite someone to come along and watch with you. Easiest way to do that is to take the link of what you're watching and where you're watching from, just copy it in your device and send it as a message to a friend, especially if you know that they're going through a storm right now. Say, hey, you know what, I know you're going through an obstacle. Hey, why don't you watch this with me? I hope that this will be helpful and encouraging for you. So just go ahead and send that to them. If you're watching on live.theridgecc.com, you can actually just click the invite button that you'll see, and you can actually click your favorite social channel and just post this link right there. You can also just grab someone in your house. If you know someone that's kind of going through a tough time, and just say, hey, would you just watch this with me, and invite them to come with you. While you're inviting someone to watch this with you, I want to share with you what to expect in our time together today. In just a moment, the band is going to lead us in a couple of songs, and here's what I love to do with those songs. If I'm alone, I like to sing out loud and just kind of sing along with these songs. It's kind of my way to pray to God. But if you're uncomfortable singing, that's okay. You can actually just read the words and use that as a time to reflect on what Christians believe to be true about God. After those songs are led by the band, we're actually going to kick off our series with Mark, and then I'm going to come back up, and I hope you'll stick around because I'm going to share with you the number 1 way that you can get the most out of this series. So I'm going to kick it over to the band, and let's get started.
I'm Afton. Again, please join us in this song. I stand before you now, the greatness of your renown. I have heard of the majesty and wonder of you, King of heaven, in humility I bow as your love and wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me. For you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all to enter in. I have heard you calling my name. I have heard the song of love that you sing. So I'll let you draw me out beyond the shore into your grace. Oh, your grace, as your love to the waves. 'Cause you make me brave. You make me brave. No fear can hinder now the promises you made. Oh, 'cause you make me brave. You make me brave. You call me out beyond the shore into the waves. Oh, 'cause you make me brave. You make me brave. No fear can hinder now the promises you made. As your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me. For you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way. As your love in wave after wave crashes over me, crashes over me. For you are for us, you are not against us. Champion of heaven, you made a way. Champion of heaven, you made a way for all to enter.
Well, welcome again, everyone. We are glad you're here with us. My name is Nate. Again, this is Afton and Olivia. If we have not gotten a chance to meet yet, hey, and things might look a little different up here this week, and we just thought as we dove into this new series, it would be cool to just kind of bring the production down a little bit and really just draw our attention in to God's promises and all that He says to be true, that we can really lean into when we come together, we hear from His Word, and when we sing. So would you join us? When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot thou hast taught me to say, it is well, it is well with my soul. It is well with my soul.
With my soul.
It is well. It is well with my soul. Yeah. My sin, oh, the bliss of this glorious thought. My sin not in part, but the whole is nailed to the cross.
It is well with my soul. You know, as I'm reading the chat along and I'm seeing what you guys are dealing with, it's so encouraging to be reminded that it is well with us, even as we are going through our storms. Hey, right now, we're going to move into the part of our service where we are going to bring our offering to God together. Now, if you are new with us or just visiting, or if you aren't even sure if you are a follower of Jesus yet, you can let this part of service just pass you by. But if you do consider yourself a follower of Jesus, and if you call the Ridge your church home, I want to invite you to take this step of faith and honor God with your finances by bringing a portion of that back to Him right now. In fact, let's just all do this all together and bring our offerings to God. Hey, in just a moment, we're going to join back up with the band as they're going to sing another song. And this song is just a great way to set up what we're about to experience as we go into Eye of the Storm Part 1. And so when they do this song, I really want you just to listen to what is sung and pay attention to the visuals that you'll see on the screen as a way to remind us of all of the storms that we are in right now. So go ahead and check this out as I kick it back over to our band.
President Trump weighing in on all the unrest in a weekend of tweeting about everything from...
Let's take a look at some of the storm that's happening.
Nowhere near over. This morning, hospitalizations are increasing in 15 states.
Protests have grown nationwide since the Jacob Blake shooting in Kenosha.
New claims for unemployment increasing for the first time.
Schools are fighting desperately to plan around the pandemic. New cases here in the last 24 hours. 3 more people have died.
No justice!
The arrows fly, 10,000 fall, still you protect me through it all. The waters rise, the oceans rage, still you're the one. The storm obeys. In the shelter of your presence, in the shadow of your wings, I am safe. I am safe. I will hold on to your promise. You will not abandon me. I am safe. I am safe. To you I run when mountains shake. You are my shield, my hiding place. Almighty God, I will draw near. Your perfect love cast out all fear. In the shelter of your presence, in the shadow of your wings, I am safe. I am safe. I will hold on to your promise. You will not abandon me. I am safe. I am safe. There's nothing left to fear. There's nothing left to fear. Ooh. There's nothing left to fear. Oh, there's nothing left to fear. Oh, in the shelter of your
I don't know about you, but as I watched those images just over the last 6 months, I feel like I'm on an emotional roller coaster. You know, sometimes you feel hopeless, other times you feel hopeful. Sometimes you feel discouraged, sometimes I feel encouraged. You wake up every day and you're like, well, what's today gonna bring? Well, if we've never met, my name is Mark and I'm one of the pastors here on staff, and I want to begin by asking you an important question. How are you doing, really? When I get asked that question now, a whole bunch of other questions begin to go through my mind. Questions like, do you really want to know the truth? Are you talking about personally? Are you talking about professionally? I mean, when someone asks me that question now, there is just so many layers to it. It's a complicated question. So let me ask you again. How are you doing? Really? If you're watching online, I want you to put an emoji in the chat that describes how you're doing. But if you're joining us, whether Oak Creek or right here in Greenfield, I want you to give me a thumbs up or thumbs down to answer that question. How are you doing, really? Thumbs up or thumbs down? My guess, with all that's going on, I would bet most of us aren't doing all that well. A few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine, and he said this. He said, 2020 has been the year of storms. And I began thinking about what he said, and I thought, I mean, he's exactly right. I mean, we're in the middle of just 4 storms right now. We're in the middle of a health storm, a financial storm, a political, and a social storm. I mean, storms are everywhere. And these storms are having a scarring effect on all of our lives. Research shows that we are actually more anxious, angry, afraid, disconnected, exhausted, lonely, and hopeless. And things like abuse and addiction and suicide, depression, and divorce are all on the rise, and not just in this country, but across the world. Plus, we're living with this constant feel of uncertainty. It's like, when is this thing going to end? Because there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. One of the questions that I have been asked a lot lately, both by Christians and people who aren't Christian, and personally, I got to be honest, I've asked it to myself a bunch of times, and the question is this: where's God in the middle of all this? It's like it's storm after storm, and we wonder, well, where's God, and how come he doesn't step in and do anything about it? Even people that we would consider, most of us at least would consider spiritual giants, they wrestled with this very same question. King David, who had his fair share of storms for sure, he wrote this over 2,000 years ago. And as I read this to you, I just want you to just feel the raw emotion in what he writes. He wrote this. He wrote, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you," then listen to this phrase, "hide your face from me?" Hey, God, my life's a mess, and you're playing a game of hide and seek with me. Where are you? And then listen to the rest of this. I guarantee you, many of us have felt this way, especially recently. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and then day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer me, God. You know, if you've ever asked the question, whether it be you went through a storm or you're in one now, where is God? The good news is you're not alone in that question. It's why today we're kicking off a brand new series called Eye of the Storm. And over the next 5 weeks, we are going to look at this very question. Now, let me tell you why this is such an important question. Some of you have either wandered away or walked away from your faith because of the storms you are experiencing right now. And some of you may be tuning in with us, or you're here right now and you're not a Christian. Storms are the primary reason why you are not one. And as you've been looking at what's been going on in our world over the last 6 months, this only solidifies that for you. No matter where you are on your faith journey, I hope you'll go on this journey with us. Because I believe if you're willing to lean into this question and be open to, and truly be open to what God wants to say to you, I think you're going to discover something. You're going to discover that storms don't have to sink your faith. That storms can actually build it or be a catalyst to strengthening your faith. Now, I'm really excited about this series personally because we did not have this series planned a month ago. We had a completely different fall planned, but our entire team, this isn't just a me thing, this was our entire team who does this. We just felt like this is the direction that we need to go. And so what does that mean? I don't know, but I do know that God probably has something really significant in store for us over the next couple of weeks. Eye of the Storm. Let me tell you where we got this name from. I lived in South Florida for about 8 years, and each year in South Florida, starting on June 1st in about 5 months, we have what's called hurricane season. And each year during that time I lived down there was at least one hurricane that threatened to hit where I lived. And what's great is every time you have a hurricane that's threatening where you live, everybody prays that it will go hit somewhere else, which is kind of an interesting prayer to do, but everybody does it. And every time that hurricane would be heading our way, you'd watch the news, and then about a week leading up to the news, they would have what's called the hurricane tracker. And they would track, where the hurricane was going and all that stuff. And let me show you a picture of a hurricane. We've all seen a picture of a hurricane before. And a hurricane is it's really, really fascinating because you have this part right here, this big part that everybody's eyes kind of lock into, and this is where all the heavy rains and winds and the severe storms are. But then you have this part in the middle right here. It's called the eye of the storm. And in the eye of the storm, there is complete calm. As we go through the series, this right here is the image I want us to keep in our mind. Because when we go through a storm in our lives, this is kind of the part that we focus all our energy and emotions on. But as we're going to see as we go through this, Jesus invites us when we're going through the storm, he invites us to the middle of the storm, the eye of the storm, where we can experience his peace and his presence, where we can actually experience calm even though everything around us in our lives isn't calm. And we're going to talk about how over the next few weeks. One of the most challenging things about going through a storm is that it reveals something about our faith. Storms reveal, and this is true whether you're a Christian or you're not a Christian, storms reveal for most of us that we have what's called this, circumstantial faith. And here's what circumstantial faith is. Circumstantial faith just means this: your faith in God is dependent on your circumstances. It's things are going well, so my faith in God is going well. Things are not going well, now it's like, well, I'm not sure what to believe about God anymore. As I look back at my own faith journey, this is so true for me. I never had questions or doubts about God when things were going well in my life. I never prayed this. I never prayed, God, things are going too well in my life. Where are you? Why are you allowing these things to happen to me? It was always when things weren't going well. And I bet you the same thing is true with you. Think about the last few months for a minute. For some of you, you had a good job and financially you were doing okay, but then you lost your job and now you're financially struggling and your faith is beginning to waver. COVID-19 hadn't had much of an impact on your life, but now you're starting to hear story after story of people that are close to you and it's impacting your faith. Before all this, you thought that you had a really good marriage. Things were going great, but now you've been working from home, she's been working from home, and now you understand absence makes the heart grow fonder. Now you get it, because you've been home together for 6 months, and now all of a sudden there's all this conflict and fighting, and as a result, it's impacted your faith. That's circumstantial faith. As your circumstances go, your faith follows that. But here's the problem with circumstantial faith. Our circumstances are always changing. If 2020 hasn't taught us anything, it's life is inconsistent. There is a randomness to life. And so as our circumstances change, and they're always changing, so our faith will follow. The other problem with it is this: we aren't very good at interpreting inconsistencies and randomness of life. I would bet most of us have a story where something happened to us and our reaction was, I can't believe that happened. And we got mad and we were like, why God and where God? Fast forward 2 years later, we're like, man, I'm so glad that happened. So here's what I want to do today. I want to look at a story of Jesus' disciples as they faced an actual weather storm. And we're not only going to look at their response to it, but Jesus' response to them. Now, what makes their response very surprising is when we see it in the larger context of what happened to them earlier that day. You see, earlier that day, they were with Jesus, and a large crowd of people were with Jesus. And so they're with him all day, and as a result, this large crowd gets very hangry. But the problem is they only have 2 little fishy and 5 loaves of bread. Now, many of you know this story. Jesus takes the 5 loaves and the 2 little fishy, and he is able, with that little bit of food, to feed the equivalent of what is 15,000 people. Now, the scriptures only report 5,000, but it's only men. But when you add women and children, it's about 15,000 people. Now, the disciples, they weren't just bystanders to this whole thing. They took part in this whole thing. They served all 15,000 people. Now, imagine what that did to their faith. I mean, they're like, whoa. Look at what Jesus can do. However, in a few short hours, their circumstances are about to change, and as we're going to see, their faith goes with it. Now, as I read this story, I want to encourage you to put yourself in this story. We are the disciples in this story, and this story is a picture of what many of our lives look like right now, life in the middle of a storm. And we're going to read the account that's written by Matthew, who is one of the disciples, which means he was there for this whole thing. And here's what our guy Matthew writes. He says, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside and do what he would often do after a long day, and he would pray. Now, I want us to lock into this part right here. Jesus made the disciples. See, I believe Jesus knew what was going to happen, and he sent them anyway. You see, he didn't cause it, but for some reason he allowed it to happen. Now, this is such a big idea. We're going to look at this idea over the next couple weeks. And then Matthew continues. He says, later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. So the disciples, they're about 2 miles off ashore when they encountered this severe storm. So here's what you have. You have the disciples who are coming off a spiritual high. I mean, they had seen Jesus feed 15,000 people with the equivalent of a Happy Meal. However, in a few short hours, their circumstances have completely changed, and they're trapped by a storm dangerously far from land, no Jesus. And they're wondering, where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? Where's Jesus? And it said shortly before dawn, and I think Matthew included that because he wants us to know this wasn't going on for minutes. This was going on for hours. They were fighting the storm. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost. Now, back then, most people believed that the sea was the home of evil spirits. And so they don't realize it's Jesus. They think evil spirits are coming out and getting ready to take them out. And so here's what they're thinking. So, hey, it's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. Well, of course they did. I mean, they don't know how things are going to turn out, and the outcome is still uncertain. And so they do what we often do when we're afraid. We play out the what-if scenarios in our mind. It's like, okay, well, what if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? What if this happens? What if this doesn't happen? The problem when we play the what-if scenarios out in our mind, now we can no longer see our situation clearly. You know, this is why Jesus isn't right in front of them, and they think he is Casper, the unfriendly ghost. I thought that was actually kind of funny when I put that in. No one else thought that was okay. And then the story continues. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage. Literally, choose courage, which is interesting. We think we're born with courage. According to Jesus, courage is a choice. Choose courage. It is I, once again, choose not to be afraid. And so what Jesus is doing here is he's trying to make an important connection for them, not just in this storm, but in the other storms that they will face in their lives in the future. When you read the rest of their story, they faced a bunch of other storms. And here's the connection. When we realize Jesus is with us in the middle of a storm, you don't have to be afraid. And then I love what happens next. Lord, if it's you, of course, it's the outspoken Peter, tell me to come to you on the water. Now, why would Peter say this? Because Peter was a disciple. And a disciple believed that whatever their teacher could do, they could do. And so Peter is looking at this and he's going, well, you know, if Jesus can do this, then somehow I should be able to do this. And so Peter's request is based entirely on his faith in what he believes Jesus can do. And then here's what Jesus says to him: come on, come on, come on in. Now, once again, I want you to put yourself in the story. You've been in this boat 4 hours battling this storm, and you're afraid, you're wet, you're exhausted. Jesus is coming at you, who you first think is a ghost, and he's going to end your life. Then you realize it's Jesus, and so you're seeing him walk on water, and you're dealing with all that emotion. And then you hear Peter, and you see Peter, and he's beginning to step out of the boat, getting ready to try to walk on water, of all things, in the middle of a storm, and he can't swim. Now, I don't know about you, all right? But here's what I'm doing if I'm one of the disciples. I'm kind of stepping back, whatever I'm doing. I'm taking some leftover, fish and bread from what just happened earlier in the day. And I'm sitting down. I'm watching how this movie's going to go because I want to see what's going to happen here. And Matthew tells us how this movie goes. It says, then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. And Matthew just says walked, but I think he should have said wobble walked. You know, like when a little kid takes his first steps towards his parents, kind of like he's kind of doing this whole deal towards Jesus, but he's walking. And it's here. We get our first glimpse of life in the eye. See, here's Peter, storm raging around him, outcome completely uncertain. But he is completely focused on Jesus, not the storm. And Jesus is doing a miracle in the middle of the storm. Can you imagine what it would have been like to be Peter in those moments? Imagine what it would have been like to be the other 11 watching this. It would have been like watching Peter. I would have been like, hey, Jesus, tell me to come. Tell me to come. I'm ready now to go. There's so many great things about this story that are so relatable to us. One of them is what Peter does next. He actually steps out of the eye. Here's what happens next. It says, but when he saw the wind, and understand, this is the same wind that had been there the entire time he was walking on the water. But for some reason, and Matthew doesn't tell us why, he doesn't say, the wind gust picked up. He didn't say, maybe Peter started thinking about it. Maybe you've had this experience before. You're doing something and you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. All of a sudden, then you realize really what you're doing and you start to think, what if this fails, and you kind of run all those scenarios. We don't know why. We just know that for some reason, Peter started to focus on the storm rather than focus on Jesus. It says, and he was afraid. And of course he was. Because when we're facing a storm, we often feel like it's us versus the storm, don't we? And if you're a sports fan, this is what we would call a bad matchup for us. Because almost all the storms that we will face, the storms are bigger than us. And so he was afraid and beginning to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. Hey, God, I'm drowning. Would you do something to help me here? And then immediately, Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. You have little faith. Literally, you have little trust in what I can do. He said, why do you doubt? And that word doubt means double-minded. It means this. Hey, I trust you, now I don't. I trust you, now I don't. This is great. Think about Peter's journey. Just in the last 24 hours, he sees Jesus feed the 15,000. He's like, I trust you. He's walking on water. I trust you. But for some reason, circumstances change. Now I don't trust you anymore. I'm having a hard time here. I can't tell you how many times I have caught myself in this very, very same cycle. Throughout my life, but just in the last 6 months alone. I call it getting caught in the storm cycle. And this is what the storm cycle looks like. It's a storm hits, and we focus all our energy on the storm. And I've had a lot of storms in the last 6 months. Over the series, I'll share with you some of those. But I've had a lot of storms hit. I can remember when all this first started to go down, and we had to do something we never thought we'd have to do. We had to shut down our buildings altogether. And so, it's like, the storm hits. We're doing something we've never done before and all the uncertainty. So as a result, we start to focus on the what-if scenarios. And we start to play all these out. It's like, okay, what if we never open up again? What if our church shuts down? What if? And so I focus all my energy in all these future scenarios where 99% of them will never, ever happen. And then as a result, all these scenarios, it heightens the anxiety and fear. And every time our anxiety and fear heightens, our faith automatically decreases. The two are opposite of each other every single time. And it's like, you know what, God, I prayed and you didn't answer that. God, you must not care. You must not be big enough. I'm kind of on an island with this. And then, I start to play it out. Then I finally get to a point where I'm just tired. I'm helpless enough where I go, all right, God, would you help me now? And then every time I allow him, he always helps. Now, you would think that I would be smart enough over all these years and all the storms to kind of bypass all of this and just begin, can you turn the slide back? And just begin right over here at that starting point. Hey, God, can you help me? Back to our story. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. And notice, it didn't die down because Jesus said anything to it. It died down because of his very presence. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, truly, you're not just a regular rabbi dude. You are more than that. You are the Messiah sent by God. As we kick off our series, I want to talk about two truths that'll begin to help us to live in the I. And as I talk about these two truths aren't just positive thinking sort of thing, even though I think they help in the whole mindset thing, so don't get me wrong there. These aren't just things that'll make us feel better, even though they will make us feel better. These are truths that we can lean into. These are real. These are things we can experience in every storm. Two truths. Here's the first one. Your storm is bigger than you, but it's not bigger than Jesus. Every storm that we face, think about this. We have little or no control over the storm. I mean, you think about COVID-19 and its ripple effect, whatever that ripple effect is, no control. You think about the economy, what your employer does, what consumers do, no control. You think about the decisions that people make, decisions that the government makes, the school board makes, the decisions that the Big Ten Conference makes, for crying out loud. We have no control. What your spouse does, what your significant other does, what your kid does, very little or no control. Yet we expend so much of our energy trying to control the uncontrollable. And as a result, it just creates more fear, more anger, and more anxiety. Storms are bigger than us. But they aren't bigger than Jesus. He is capable of feeding 15,000 with barely a plate of food. He is capable of calming a dangerous storm just with his very presence. He is capable in the middle of a storm going, come on. Let's go take a walk. He is bigger than any storm you will ever face. I look at it this way. When a storm hits, you're going to put your faith in something or someone. Even if you're not a Christian, when a storm hits, you're trusting in something or someone. I think the question is, are you placing it in the right place? Or better yet, are you placing it in the right person? Second truth. Sometimes Jesus calms the storm, but he always calms you. Sometimes we pray and the storm dies down. The marriage makes it. The right job opportunity opens up. You get the promotion. The prodigal son or daughter comes home again. Things work out the way you want them to, but sometimes we do, and it doesn't turn out the way we want to. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why that is over the next couple of weeks. But here's what I know. If it doesn't turn out the way you want them to, he will always calm you. In other words, he will always give you exactly what you need to go through the storm, whether that be strength, whether that be peace, whether that be provision, whether that be people in the middle of your storm. But our part of it is we have to ask for it. You know, this is what Peter did. I mean, Peter asked for it. The other 11, they just kind of sat in the boat and were like, well, I'm not going to do anything there. I'm just going to kind of sit back and watch this thing play out. Peter asked for it, and as a result, he experienced something that changed his life forever. Let me ask you, what storm are you going through in your life right now? For some of you, you are going through a relational storm. And your home life, I mean, it's just storm after storm after storm. For some of you, you're going through a financial storm right now. Whether that be the economy has impacted you, whether it be you've been furloughed, whatever it may be, that financial margin that you once had, now it's nothing, and you're really starting to get worried because you don't know how you're going to pay the bills next month. You know, for some of you, as you look at just some of the social and political stuff that we're in the middle of right now, I mean, it's just creating such anxiety and anger in you. You know, for others, you're going through a mental health storm right now, and you're just anxiety and fear and depression. It is having a huge impact on your life. Listen, can I just challenge you to do something? Can I just challenge you to begin with not focusing on the storm, but to ask God for help? Even if you're not a Christian, I just want to encourage you to begin there. And when I tell you to do that, I'm not telling you to deny that the storm is there. What I'm challenging you to do is just start in a different place than you did before. Remember the psalm I read earlier where David, just talking about God playing hide and seek and all that stuff. If you keep reading the rest of that psalm, he gets to the end and he makes a very important pivot. It's a pivot that we need to make in the middle of a storm. And here's his pivot. He says this, "But God, I trust in your unfailing love." Hey God, I don't like this. I wish things were different. I don't get it all, but at the end of the day, I'm going to choose to lean into you because ultimately, here's what I know. You love me. You are for me. So in a minute, someone's going to come up and talk to you how you can get the most out of this series. And let me tell you something. I hope you will do whatever you need to do to get the most of this series. But what I want to do to kick things off is I want us to do what best thing we can do. And that is just to ask God in the middle of our storm. And I tell you, over the last few months, just for me personally, and talking with other pastors, just the burden that we feel as I've been hearing storm story after storm story after storm story, and just seeing the wreckage and the damage and the hurt that's going on. I finally, over the last few weeks, have just said, enough. We're going to go to God in the middle of the storm, and we're going to ask him to move powerfully in that. So I want to ask you to bow your head and close your eyes. And Father, we just look at just this time in history that we are living in, and there is so much swirling right now. And we don't have all the answers, and we don't get it all. And God, our question, where have you been? And what are you doing? And why don't you stop this? And why aren't things different? We begin there. But God, ultimately, would you get us to that place? Whether you calm it all together, and with all the storms that are going on right now across our church, across this community, God, I ultimately pray that you will quiet the storm, whatever that is. But if not, I pray you would move in such a powerful way. You would provide exactly what's needed to calm us. Father, would you move supernaturally across this church? That in the middle of all this, you would do a miracle, just like you did for Peter, just like you're more than capable in our lives, because the storms, God, they're bigger than us, and we just acknowledge that. But they're not bigger than you. They're not bigger than you. pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I don't know what storm you're dealing with right now, and I don't know how big it is, but that was such a helpful reminder for me that Jesus is bigger than my storm. Because my family and I mean, we're dealing with the storms of how do you stay healthy and how do you handle school, and my wife working in the nursing home industry. I mean, there's a lot of storms that we're trying to figure out, and that message that Jesus always calms us in the midst of our storms. So helpful, and I hope it's helpful for you and the ones that you love. And as Mark said, we want you to get the most out of this series. And honestly, we believe the best way for you to do this is not just to join us for a weekly service online, although that's a really, really good start. But we actually think the best way for you to get the most out of the series is to connect with other people and discuss and share what you are learning and also learn from others. In fact, we have a saying around here at the Ridge that when you're in person, you learn in rows and you grow in circles. And we think this is true online as well. We learn when we join us for services, but we really grow and we experience this life change, and we really experience the peace that Jesus offers us when we do so with others. And so what we want for you is to actually join us for one of our short-term groups that we are calling Eye of the Storm. By a short-term group, I mean these are groups that will meet online once a week, and they'll connect digitally wherever they are. And the easiest way to sign up for one of these groups is by texting the word storms to the phone number that you see below me. And what's great when you do this, you'll actually get a website that'll be sent back to your device, and you'll read about all the different options of different groups that you can actually sign up for. And so there are different nights of the week, different times. So just simply pick the best one that works best for you and just try it out. I mean, if you're new with us, or whether you've been attending for a while, if you're kind of curious who Jesus is, or if you've been following Jesus for years, now is the perfect time to join a short-term group and learn and connect with others. You might already be a part of a Ridge group, and you might be wondering, hey, is this the right time for our group to come back together if you've taken a break over the summer? And the answer is yes. This is the right time for your Ridge group to come back together. If your Ridge group leader hasn't already, they'll be in touch with you soon about details about you guys getting back together to go through this content together. But I also want to encourage you to text the word storms to the phone number below, because here's what's also on that website. There are also resources that you can engage with daily. You can read some articles. You can read different resources. There's going to be some videos that we'll post along the way. There's also Spotify playlists that you can check out to help bring you this encouragement, to bring you the reminder that Jesus is bigger than our storms, that you can engage with every day. And what's great about these resources is these aren't just great resources for you to enjoy. You can also share these resources with the ones that you love. If you know someone who's going through a hard time, send them the Spotify link and say, hey, would you just check this out? We hope this would be encouraging to you, because that's my hope for you, is that you would go on this journey, and the ones that you love would go on this journey as well, to discover that though our storms are big, Jesus is much bigger than the storms, and Jesus will always calm the storm inside of us. And so I hope that you'll go on this journey with us, to join us for services, to join a short-term group, to engage with these resources, and to experience just how big God is, even in the midst of these storms. So I hope you'll join us back for next week. Until then, have a great day.
It's the force that still amazes, lifting heads up through the ages. It's the force that's breaking through.